Let me first welcome everyone who is on the call. I'm Tim Warmath. I'm from Greensboro, North Carolina originally, and it's my pleasure to serve on the North Carolina Committee for Democrats Abroad worldwide. Our two co-chairs, Sylvia and Robert, are also on this call, and we'll have an opportunity to hear from them later in the call. It's so great working with them. But on the call are a team of committed volunteers who live across the globe and also some in the United States, working for the betterment of our Democratic Party and our North Carolinians who vote across the globe. And today, it's our great pleasure to welcome two special guests onto our call to talk a little bit about the landscape of North Carolina, where we are as we finish 2023. As you may know, we didn't have a significant number of statewide or large elections in the off cycle in November, although we did have a couple of important mayoral races. But to give us a picture of the landscape of North Carolina, of what 2024 is going to hold for us. The first person I'd like to introduce is Jessica Lawrence. Jessica is the executive director of Put North Carolina First, but she has an absolutely extraordinary background in terms of activism. She's a Vandy alum. Go Commodores. Well done, Jessica. And she started really as a field director, and she'll tell us more about that. But she worked in public policy for Planned Parenthood. She then spent a significant period of time, 6 years, as a state director for America Votes. And America Votes work is so important. And then I think it was January of 2019, do I have that right, Jessica? You came over to Put North Carolina First as the executive director, and Jessica is based in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our second special guest is our friend Jeffrey Blum, who. What is so great about Jeff is he's not even a North Carolinian. He has adopted North Carolina as one of our wonderful volunteers. He was the executive director of U.S. Action and U.S. Action Education Fund for many years, which is now called People's Action. That was from November of 1999 to June of 2013. He's then has been a senior fellow for the Center for International Policy, a founding director for Global Progressive Hub, which was formerly the Progressive Global Strategy Project, and also there's been the founding organizer for All In for NC, and is the chair in 2023. So we've got Put North Carolina First and All In for NC. Sometimes the titles can be a little bit confusing, but in reality, what they are doing is advancing the cause of North Carolina, democracy in North Carolina, and the Democratic Party in North Carolina. So I'm going to turn it over to Jessica and to Jeff to say a brief hello, and then to start into a fireside chat. Jessica and Jeff may as well, but Jessica's also going to share some slides with us about giving us a current landscape for North Carolina. So Jessica or Jeff, over to you.
I think you, in deference to somebody who actually lives in North Carolina.
And she's up in the North Carolina mountains, so it's unfair that she's up in the Blue Ridge.
That's right. I am in the Blue Ridge today. Really happy to be with y'all, though, and thank you so much for taking time to jump on and learn about what we have going on in North Carolina as we get ready for next year. And thank you so much, Tim, for inviting me and Jeff to be a part of this conversation. So, like Tim said, what I'll do, if it's okay with you, Jeff, is I'll give a little bit of overall context and share some slides, and then we can come back and just engage in conversation with everybody, and happy to take lots of questions. But give me one quick second and I'll share my screen here. Just want to do kind of a quick landscape overview for y'all and sort of ground you in sort of where we are in North Carolina as we go into next year's presidential election. But I'm going to say really quickly first a little bit about Put NC First, in case you're not familiar with the organization. So I'm the executive director of Put North Carolina First. As Tim said, it is a community of donors and political strategists that are working together to win critical elections in North Carolina. It has been in existence in the state since really about 2011. So we're on about our 12th year. And my sort of responsibility is to understand and be able to convey to donors, both in North Carolina and nationally, what the sort of nonprofit infrastructure is doing when it comes to civic engagement and election work. So think about organizations like Planned Parenthood, League of Conservation Voters, the AFL-CIO. Those groups are all my partners, and I'm working to coordinate and resource their work to win elections in state. The donor table in North Carolina operates from a strategy of investing in sort of 4 key priorities that we believe have to be functioning day in and day out in order for us to build progressive power in the state. So not just the 3 months leading up to an election day, but every single day. And you see those on the screen here. The first thing we know is we have to work to expand our electorate. North Carolina is growing and changing all of the time. New folks are moving in, and we have to identify those folks, get them registered to vote, and make sure that they are actively participating every election cycle. So we raise and spend a lot of money toward that goal. And we also know that we have to drive a winning narrative. We have to tell a good story about who Democrats are, and we have to tell a clear story about who our opposition is and what damage they're doing to our state and to our people. The third thing we know is we have to invest in our folks. And for us, that means candidate recruitment and training, making sure we have the best folks running for office. But it also means the organizers and the organizational leaders that are doing the work day in and day out on the ground in the state. And then last, we know we have to win elections. So we have to resource campaigns we can't get outspent by our opponents. And we have to do that every cycle. So that's just a little bit about who we are, so you have that context. As we think about next year and what we are getting ready for, what we know is that, since 2014, Democrats in North Carolina have kept our federal statewide elections extremely close, but we're having a lot of trouble getting past 48, 49%. You can see here that the average since 2014 is about 48.7%. And so as we think about next year's presidential election and the US Senate races that we have, the 2 cycles after that, we've been really thinking a lot in state about what do we do to get over that hump, right, and actually get to the finish line. And we know that that's our short-term goal. And you can see here, this is a sort of breakdown of North Carolina's electorate. And you can see how closely divided it is. We have about 1.3 million voters statewide that are Democratic-based voters, right? They show up every single time. Republicans have about 1.5 million base voters. We both have considerable amounts of voters who are sporadic, right? They might show up in presidential years, but not in midterm elections. And then we have about 1 million people who are in the middle. They might split their tickets. They might switch back and forth depending on the election. So, what we're dealing with is a state that is extremely evenly divided. And so, we have to operate in that context. We're also dealing with a state that is rapidly growing and changing. As I said before, it's the 3rd fastest growing state in the country. And as it is growing, it is continuing to diversify and to urbanize, right? As Raleigh and Charlotte become larger portions of the vote every year. And so that is sort of where we're sitting as we think about, okay, what do we need to accomplish in 2024? And it's going to be a huge year for North Carolina. I know everyone says every year it's the most important election of our lives. This one really feels like it, though, here in state. And, we know that we've got to help deliver our 16 electoral votes to President Biden. There's no path for Republicans to the White House if we can block them in North Carolina. And so we take that responsibility very seriously. We also have an open governor's race. And we have new legislative maps under which we believe we have a path to breaking the Republican supermajority so that if we do win the governor's race, we can reliably sustain the governor's vetoes and we can stop the worst attacks on abortion and democracy and, you know, all the things that the Republicans are taking aim at. And then we have a statewide Supreme Court race on the ballot as well that we have to win on the sort of 3-cycle path back to taking back the state Supreme Court. So that's what we're going to be focused on. And in order to do that, in order to achieve those goals, first and foremost, we know we're going to have to do the work to expand the electorate in state. And we have a lot of opportunity to do that. You can see here, there are still about 800,000 unregistered eligible voters that we believe would vote for Democrats if we found them, got them to fill out a form and show up. A lot of those folks are in our cities in Raleigh and Charlotte, but North Carolina is also the battleground state with the largest number of rural voters. So we also have to be doing voter registration across the state. And you can see the map at the bottom, sort of how those people are spread out. And so our partners on the ground next year are going to be making serious investments in starting to chip away at that gap. And you can see here that they have set a goal of collecting a minimum of 190,000 voter registration applications. They've already started doing this. They've got offices open in 8 locations around the state, and they're going to be opening 8 more as we move into next year. These are groups that are doing year-round community organizing and are able to identify unregistered voters in a way that, you know, maybe like a large sort of last-minute program wouldn't be able to do. And they have been doing voter registration work for over a decade, so they're well practiced at it. And that's sort of where they're going to be putting most of their focus as we move into next year. We also know that in addition to unregistered voters, we have a lot of Democrats in North Carolina who have just been staying home. And what you see here is a slide that shows you that we just haven't been running programs in the state at the size necessary to get the job done. And this is a lot of the reason why you're kind of seeing North Carolina fall short in some of these federal statewide races. I'll just give you one example. In 2020, our coalition partners knocked on about 1.4 million doors. But at that size, they were only able to have a conversation either at the doors or on the phone with 3 out of every 10 of the mobilization targets that we need to talk to turn out to vote that year. And as a result, about 1 million Democrats stayed home. And as we all know, North Carolina lost the presidential race that year by less than 75,000 votes. So our challenge for next year is we've got to get to the scale that we need to reach more of those folks. And we have a group of partners on the ground that have been building their organizing capacity really since 2016. They've been working together all year to put a plan together to do a door-to-door canvassing program that would produce about 3.8 million knocks across 48 counties in the state. Now you'll note that's about 3 to 4 times bigger than what we ran in 2020. So we are really at a place now where we think we can get to the scale necessary to win statewide in North Carolina. And you can see the counties on the map there where people are going to be focusing most of that work. And then just 2 quick other priority programs, and then I'll stop and we can have more discussion. You know, we also know that it's part of our job on the nonprofit side to make sure that early in the election, voters get a lot of information about our opponents. And our primary target for that in 2024 is going to be the likely Republican nominee for governor, Mark Robinson, who is our current lieutenant governor. And if you don't know about Mark Robinson, I would encourage you to Google him, maybe watch some of his speeches. He is, there's really no other way to say it besides sort of a MAGA extremist Christian nationalist, like a state level Trump, basically. So a real threat to North Carolina's future and prosperity. And we're going to be really focused, and have been for most of this year already, on making sure voters understand who he is, the kinds of things that come out of his mouth, his policy positions, and what a threat that would be to North Carolina. And then last, but definitely not least, we're also going to be really focused on protecting our elections from interference by the Republicans, and also protecting our voters from intimidation or suppression. And so we have a really robust network of organizations that have been doing this work together for a long time, and they're going to be very focused on, recruiting and training volunteers to be at polling places to help voters if they run into any trouble, and doing a lot of education and work to help people make sure they have the right kind of voter ID, because this is going to be the first year we have voter ID in North Carolina, and in tracking, far right and white supremacist activity in the state to make sure that we, know if there are plans to disrupt, intimidate, or otherwise cause problems at the polls. So that is big picture, just sort of context of what we are facing and what we are planning for next year. I'll stop there, and happy to go into a little more discussion.
Wow, Jessica, that is absolutely incredible, and those slides will help us to bring that so many questions. Let's pass it over to Jeff to tell us a little bit about his work and All In for NC, and how that work is aligning with everything that Jessica and the donor table are doing.
Thank you. All In for NC was started in 2020 during the presidential campaign. It's basically, there are 100 counties in North Carolina. I see in the chat that you all come from a few of them. We like to think that we're sort of the 101st county, which is to say the other 49 states. And although now 49 states and various continents that you all come from, live in. Basically, we work with groups like Jessica's in North Carolina and candidates to support their work to win elections and build progressive political power. We are all volunteer. We don't have a bank account, but we raise money. We raised about $400,000 for Jessica's organization last spring. Some of you may have been donors to that. Thank you. I will say this is not the official All In wrap, but we look for the smartest and most strategic people in the state, and we want to work with them so that we know that whatever we're doing makes a lot of sense. And we regard Jessica and her organization as pretty much at the top of that food chain. That said, and I myself was a community organizer, as you heard, all my life. The way that the law is structured, Jessica can work with the C3s and C4s. But there obviously are other important entities in politics, the parties and the candidates. The beauty of our non-existent tax status is we can work with all of them. And so with the advice of many people, including Jessica, we felt in 2023 that we should focus our work in Mecklenburg County, the second largest county in the state, but the largest number of Democrats and the most undervoting Democratic major county in the state. And it turned out that the first group that we wanted to work with there was the revived North Carolina Democratic Party under the local party chair, a 26-year-old guy named Drew Cromer. And we have done that, and we will continue to do that. And we welcome people's participation in our phone banks or other activities, including the fundraiser that we're doing next week for both the state and the county party. And Tim or Chloe, if you're the kind of tech person. I don't know if either of you is able to put my my flyer up. I myself couldn't figure out how to do it. But here's the Act Blue link to our fundraiser. I think I see a couple of you, Sylvia and Tim, who are, clearly already part of it. So our view is there are three big legs of the field stool. And this is basically, Jessica has this in her presentations also. They're the candidates. We need high quality candidates. And under Jessica's leadership is an organization called Lead NC, which focuses on candidate recruitment and development. So we need high quality candidates. We need a strong Democratic Party. We have not had one in North Carolina for a long time. But now at the state and many county levels, we know Mecklenburg best, but there are some other excellent examples. Pitt County has new leadership. Cabarrus County has new leadership. Durham County has just raised enough money to hire an executive director for the first time in, I don't know, maybe ever, anyway, a long time. We work with them. And then, of course, there is the terrific C3, C4 infrastructure. And I can't emphasize enough that the strategic approach that Put NC First takes, and with them, America Votes, the coalition of political organizations, Blueprint NC, the coalition of C3 organizations, Progress NC, which has put together, Jessica, you should put the Robinson website up there from Progress NC. They have staff who do nothing but try to define Mark Robinson to the voters and tie him to the state legislative candidates and the other candidates down the ballot so that people can't just say, oh, well, he's kind of a little wacky, but I'm not like that. They're in the same party and they're going in the same direction. So what we do is very simple. We recruit volunteer activity and we raise money for these groups and occasionally for candidates. And we welcome all participation with you on that. We can talk in the Q&A part about what some of the activities might be. But the most important thing, honestly, is what Jessica laid out and the groups that Jessica so ably helps bring together.
That is so great, Jeff. Thank you. I think it'd be interesting, since we have callers from across the globe, to align a couple of more things in this discussion. First is maybe if Jennifer's still on, or maybe Sylvia could take over to talk a little bit about what the North Carolina team for Democrats Abroad means, because that work is aligned with what Jessica and Jeff are doing. And then after that, maybe for a quick moment, Chloe could give us a little bit of the data analytics of how North Carolinians voted from overseas this past November. I think that'd be really interesting for people to hear, because as we keep coming back to every time, when this started a few years ago, was that our candidate for the Supreme Court, Sherry Beasley, only lost her campaign by, Jessica, what was it, 400 and something votes?
401. Yeah, that's right, 401.
So think if we had 402 North Carolinians who voted from abroad that day, she would have won that race. So I'm going to turn it over maybe to Sylvia or to Jennifer, if she's still on, just to talk a little bit about what the state teams mean for Democrats Abroad. Then we'll go to Chloe, and then we'll open for questions. How does that sound to everybody?
Okay, Jennifer, if you're there, might be good because you can give an overview of we have 14 state teams, I believe. So if you're there, you might want to chime in.
Sure. I'm Jennifer.
Thank you.
I'm Jennifer von Esdorf, and I am our state teams coordinator for all of our state teams here at Democrats Abroad. And as Sylvia said, we have 14 state teams, mostly representing battleground states, but also some states like California, who where we know that there are essential congressional districts that we need to win and an important senatorial race coming up. Our state teams have been working for the past 2 years to really build up our efforts to address state-specific issues, to bring in our voters, to help them understand the importance of voting all the way down the ballot, and the importance of voting in every single election. I would say that overseas voters have a tendency to vote in presidential years and then kind of meander off and not really think about anything until the next 4 years come around. And in general, overseas voters have there's just a low rate of participation because people don't know that they can vote. People don't know how to vote. There are barriers to voting from abroad, though thank goodness North Carolina is one of the easiest states to vote in from abroad. And so our job at Democrats Abroad is really to educate people as to how they vote and to let them know the importance of their vote and what it can mean. We like to call ourselves the margin of victory because we can provide that crucial margin in so many of these really close races, and people just don't realize that their vote is so important. And that's what we're here for. That's why we're out there really trying to recruit people on the ground in our country committees. We are all over the world, and we would love for people to join our teams, to join these efforts, because it's so important. And next year we're going to need all the hands we can get. So thanks for joining us today.
And one of the other things that we do for those of us who, can go back or do go back to our home states, and I know I've got a British accent, but I have dual citizenship, and we do go back. And I know when I was in Charlotte for a few months recently, and again, it's just making connection with the other people on the ground who are doing the work within your particular state, whether you're, zooming in today, it doesn't matter, North Carolina, California, wherever. And, just making touch with places, like Indivisible or Red, Wine and Blue, and just your local organizations, get to know the people at the elections offices, get to know the people at the school board. And, again, all the voting down ballot is really, really important. And most people that I touch base with when I'm in Charlotte have never heard of Democrats Abroad. But almost everybody I speak to has a friend or a friend of a friend or a family member who's living abroad. And, I hand out my little card. I've got little cards made up, and, votefromabroad.org, just hand them out, and let your friends and family, colleagues, whomever, know that they can vote from abroad. And, let's just get North Carolina on the map again.
Before we go to Chloe to give us some of the data, Julia has her hand up to ask a question.
I just wanted to add on to what everyone has been saying. The other thing that we do is we also provide voter protection and voter support. And because one thing that we have found over the years, and I was the global chair from 2017 to 2021, and worked a lot on North Carolina, and it was very important state because that's where I voted. But is we make sure that we're educating local election officials on rights of Americans abroad, because our rights are different from regular state absentee voters. And it's really important for LEOs to understand that. They often do not. They will maybe put us in the same bucket as regular state absentee voters. And so that's part of our education and outreach that we also do. And we would love to work with you, as you probably are also working with LEOs, to make sure that they have that information as well. And we would also love to work with you if in your door knocking, when you're door knocking, it's, when someone's not there, when they're abroad, most of the time, I know in mobile van, that person's marked as not there anymore. But if they could be marked as abroad, then we can reach out to them and we can help them get their votes and send them back to North Carolina. And it would be a great way for you guys to work with us and be part of that effort to send the votes back. Because you know what we say, when American abroad votes, Democrat back home wins. And it's a really, we're the bluest of all states.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much, Julia, for bringing up those important points. Let's just turn it over to Chloe for a minute. Chloe's getting her PhD at Cambridge, so she knows how to do this data work. I'm deeply impressed by that. But she can tell us a little bit about what what our voters abroad look like from North Carolina from November, which I think is really, really interesting.
Sure thing. Just sharing my screen now. Let me make sure this is in presenter mode. Can you all see this?
Yes.
Yeah, fantastic. So I'll just give a really brief overview of some of the NC voter results from the 2022 midterm. I analyzed this against the backdrop of past midterm elections, but I want to add that North Carolina voters from abroad have really made the difference in the 2020 and 2016 elections as well. I'm just going through here that we had a really great turnout in 2022. Democrats, we had 8,300 North Carolina voters sending in their ballots from outside the US. And this is stronger turnout than in 2018, which was a referendum year. Oops. So 3 takeaways here when we sort the overseas voter turnout by age. Across the board, most of these voters from abroad were Democrats. There were a high number of independent voters as well, and the highest turnout was in young voters, 18 to 22, probably study abroad voters sending their ballot from their universities. I also want to go over the age and gender of these voters as well. So young women tended to vote more than young men, but the reverse was true for older voters past age 45. This might have something to do with the demographics of people living abroad. Something we've been interested in as the North Carolina state team has been looking into military voters and seeing how we can help North Carolinians stationed overseas send their ballot home. And some interesting takeaways here. We had definitely more of an even split across independents, Democrats, and Republicans sending their ballot home. And surprisingly quite low turnout for young voters and higher turnout for older military voters. And this is really striking because only 2% of people in the armed forces are older than 44. So this is great turnout for that demographic, but it's a real opportunity for younger voters enlisted overseas. And then this is kind of a complicated plot, but I really wanted to highlight how there is a kind of a surprising decrease in turnout for young women from 2018 to 2022. I'll walk you through this plot here. The lighter shade of purple is women voters from 2018, and then the darker shade of purple are women voters from 2022. And it walks across from left to right, increasing by age. And the thing I really want to highlight here is in the purple boxes here, we had a decrease in young women sending their ballots home. And again, I think this really underscores an opportunity for Democrats abroad to make sure that we're reaching voters, especially in the post-Dobbs landscape. And the last thing I want to highlight is where these voters were calling in from. So overseas Republicans and Democrats cast their vote from across the state, but highlighted in the darkest purple or darkest blue colors are Wake County, counties in the Triangle, and Mecklenburg County. In rural counties, there is more of a split with some kind of light pink counties, again showing us the range of voters across the board. And this is, I think, a really maybe we can leave it here. with the focus on Mecklenburg County, despite having so many voters and certainly so many voters potentially living abroad. They only came in third when we ranked the number of votes from abroad by county. Wake County had almost double the number of voters. So again, this really highlights a place that we can put a lot of effort and make a really big difference as North Carolinians voting and from abroad.
This is super interesting, and because what for Jessica and for Jeff, what Chloe just shared, and we can share these slides with you, overlaps almost perfectly with the work that you've and the counties that you've identified and the work that we're doing. Did you see the margins in, first of all, our counties were exactly an overlay of the counties that Jessica and Jeff's work is focusing on. And number two is look at the margins between the GOP and the Democratic in our most populous counties. Those numbers can change the course of an election. Which really quite significant. I'm conscious of the time, and we have a lot of folks on, and we really appreciate this from other parts of the country, of the world. Are there folks who want to ask questions? They can either put them in the chat, or we can unmute you, because I think it'd be great to hear from you from your home country or your county that you vote in back in North Carolina about this work.
I see Jennifer flagged a question to me from Mike Garrison. Mike, would you like to unmute yourself, or I can read it out if you're not able to speak now? All right, I'm happy to read it out then. Will vote ID requirements in 2024 alter absentee registration and voting requirements for those of us living abroad or absentee voters in general?
I mean, I think I can field that
That's a really good.
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Because we are protected by federal laws, as Julia had mentioned, it's a much harder process to change the rules for overseas voters. And so fortunately for us as overseas voters, that means that we have more rights, even sometimes than in-state voters, oftentimes than in-state voters. And so just because there's an on-the-ground change for absentee voting does not automatically mean that it affects overseas voters, thanks to the federal laws that protect us. So that's something we can keep an eye on, but most likely changes that are put into place for regular absentee voters would not have a knock-on effect on us. Doesn't mean it's always the case, but usually we're pretty safe from that.
What they can do is they can throw us off rolls and require us to register every calendar year we want to vote in, but they cannot require us to have photo IDs. That's against the UCAVA Act.
Terrific, thank you.
I see Jackie is keen to hear about the governor's race, which is super important for voters from abroad, because Americans abroad were the margin of victory for Roy Cooper's 2016 election. So I think there's definitely some strong interest there.
Yeah, let me give a little bit of more context around the governor's race. So there's going to be primaries on both sides, but the likely Democratic nominee is the current Attorney General, Josh Stein. The likely Republican nominee is the current Lieutenant Governor, as I said, Mark Robinson. I think, Josh is going to be an incredible candidate. He is going to raise a considerable amount of resources. He is already, in my opinion, doing a really excellent job of getting around the state. He just completed sort of a statewide tour. Every time I look on social media, he is in some barbecue restaurant eating. I'm like, Josh, please make sure you're getting on a treadmill too. And he is facing an opponent who, as I was saying earlier, is very Trump-like in that his sort of modus operandi is divisiveness and chaos and, you know, who can he offend today? But you know, it's a race that is going to bring up a lot of issues of class and race and religion and honestly, just all kinds of levels of complication. And so as we're getting ready to do our part in, you know, which, as I was saying before, we primarily define as, you know, telling voters about who Mark Robinson is, right? And then it will be the Stein campaign's job to tell voters about who he is and why he is the better alternative. But we've been doing a lot of research on, like, how do we talk about Mark Robinson, right? Because a lot like Trump, you could go in 100 different directions, right? And then you risk it becoming this, like, you know, cacophony of just noise instead of a clear and compelling story about, like, who this person is and why he's not the right fit for North Carolina. So we've been doing focus groups for most of this year with Black voters, with Latino voters, with college educated white men, with non-college educated white women, all kinds of different demographic groups. I think the biggest and most compelling argument against Mark Robinson is when you take some of his rhetoric, right? Like the fact that he is a clear misogynist, right? The things he has said and the comments he has made about women, particularly women in power, are atrocious. And when you pair that with an actual policy position, like the fact that he has openly said that if he gets a willing legislature, he would want to ban abortion in North Carolina for any reason at any time, that those are the sort of most powerful arguments against him. So the misogyny plus abortion ban line of attack is really potent. You're going to probably see and hear us talking a lot about that. But there's also a lot to say about his terrible economic positions. He's very anti-public education. He has said terrible racist things, anti-Black comments that we're going to make sure voters hear about. So, yeah, I think, as I said before, this is a really extremely divided state. We're taking nothing for granted. But this is an opponent that we have a lot to work with, right? And we can make a clear and compelling case against him if we have the resources to do so. And we're ready to go on that.
Fantastic. Arthur has a question, and I'm just going to see if I can get Arthur unmuted.
Hi.
Fab.
Perfect. Thanks, Chloe. And thanks for all the information provided. It's all really interesting. Just had a question about your data set, Chloe. I didn't see, unless I missed it, was there more information about voters who didn't participate in the last election, 2020 and 2022, and also unregistered voters abroad? I'm just kind of curious if there's any efforts in reaching unregistered voters to maybe increase greater turnout.
That's a great question. So the difficult part is that we don't have a ton of information about unregistered voters who are living abroad, because I guess we Democrats abroad wouldn't know about them. And same kind of goes for unaffiliated or independent voters. But we did see from, I guess we can kind of answer the latter part of that by looking at the independent voters in the data set of voters who did participate in the midterm election. And we see that there is a really large amount of voters casting their ballot who are independents. So it's kind of a big question of how do we reach out to them who definitely wouldn't be, might not be engaged with Democrats abroad, but are engaged in sending their ballots home. So it's kind of an open question that we in the state team are working on currently.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
I could also add to that, just in general, the work of Democrats abroad. I mean, we do have country committees across the globe who are really working on the ground to find Americans living in their countries. And they do this by tabling, they mail, they phone, they try to go through friend networks, they go to American clubs, schools, study abroad programs. I mean, it's a very intense effort. Democrats Abroad's been around for over 50 years. And so the effort to find people on the ground is really where we're trying to, get the Americans who live abroad, who don't know about voting, who aren't registered to vote, or maybe haven't voted in a while, trying to get them to engage with the process. So there's a lot of efforts, in addition to what we're doing within the state teams, to find those new voters. And also just, as Sylvia said, putting the word out on the ground in the state, because everyone pretty much knows somebody living abroad, and letting them know that they can vote. So many, many different ways that we're trying to find people, but there are millions of people who do not vote. And those are the ones that we still have to reach. Yeah.
And there are also people who register and receive ballots and they don't send, there's a big gap. So in 2020, 28,000 people received ballots, and only, I think, 27,000 people sent their ballots back. So that's one of the major things that we do locally, is we provide the lift and logistical support to help people get their ballots back. North Carolina, which has the electronic ballot, which is so easy, people just still need that lift and reminder.
There's also an interesting point, Julia, in the chatter for the group about, will North Carolina, Dems abroad in North Carolina have a separate phone bank? Let me give you a little bit of history. In 2008, we did set up a manual phone bank in donated space at UCL in London. And it was effective, calling in GMT, Central European time, and all the way as far east as Athens. And we divided it up by country, and we had people who were also local language speakers, because often people would pick up the phone and they would speak in local tongue, and then they would switch to English once they found that it was one of us volunteers who was calling. So I don't know if we're going to do that. And this was 2008 technology, so we were using, printed telephone pages. We didn't have any of the technology that we have now for phone banking. So maybe Julia or Jennifer or Jessica can tell us if that might be something we can do moving forward for voters abroad.
Well, the thing to remember about North Carolina voters is they're all over the world, and so in some cases, it's more effective to lump North Carolina voters with other state voters as well, like voters from Virginia or or Georgia, and have a calling campaign that's going to be maybe 3 or 5 states. So it really depends upon how the GOTV decides to divide them up. Because remember, we're calling regionally. We don't call all voters around the world at the same time, because the time zones don't work. And that's just something good to understand about how that works. But we use, just so Jeff, and Jessica, we have a program called Call Hub that allows us to know how many times we've called a voter, and then we also, of course, have surveys that we take, so we understand where they are in the voting process. Getting them towards that ballot. It's a lot of steps, more steps for us than for other voters.
I want to suggest, listening to this, that if it works for you all, one thing to do would be to try to designate somebody who, for example, if you have somebody who really cares about Mecklenburg, they're from Mecklenburg, or they just are embarrassed by Trisha Cotham getting away with murder. If you have a person who then becomes your point person, people like us and others can then know, we can have an efficient conversation about what you can do. Can you plug into our phone banks? We have had people calling on phone banks of ours from Europe in the past. It's much more likely when you get closer to the election and the phone banks start running earlier in the day. Right now, we tend to run 6 p.m. Eastern time. So have to be somebody who's kind of a night owl in Europe. But, as you get closer to the election, we will be running, we already know of things that are 3 o'clock in the afternoon scheduled. And that begins to become quite useful for Europe. I mean, not to mention those of you in Latin America where the time zone is not, really the problem, or even West Coast US. We ran a phone bank out of Hawaii in 2020 that was 11 a.m. their time, so that they were calling North Carolina voters at 5 p.m., which was a good time. So there are different ways to do it. If you have And if it works for you and the North Carolina team to designate a phone person or a Mecklenburg person or a voter registration person, then whether it's through All In or through Put or through one of the many groups in Jessica's massive spider web of C3s and C4s, we can try to make that an efficient use of time so that we're all, because time is money in an election, right? At this point, a year out from the election, a minute spent effectively just matters so much more than a minute wasted. And that only gets more true over the next 12 months.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Jeff, just like when you say a minute wasted, I agree completely that we need to be acting constantly. And I'm just wondering, we're talking a lot about phone banks, but I've done phone banks. I've done it for the 2020 runoff election in Georgia for Raphael Warnock. And it was good, but I got maybe 5-6 people on the phone out of 40 or 50, and I know that's the way phone banking goes. But I'm wondering, is there any sort of efforts in terms of reaching Gen Z crowd, say TikTok, social media, things like that, where I know we're all Democrats abroad, and there's Facebook groups from Democrats, expats all around the world. I'm just wondering, are there any efforts in terms of reaching new voters that way, through new vote registration, or just getting them to request their ballot?
I'm happy to talk about that a little bit if you guys.
Yeah.
And so, Jessica may have thoughts about that too. And I have a 2:00 call also, so I'm gonna have to get off now.
But just from a broad point of view, first of all, phone banking abroad is a really different matter than phone banking in the United States. We're the only people calling, so people love hearing from us. So sign up and phone bank. But we do get in touch with people through social media, through influencers, through study abroad outreach. It's you have to follow all channels because there's so many different ways of getting in touch with people, and our demographics are so broad that you can't just rely on one medium. So that's if you're interested, we'd love for you to talk to us, and we're working on trying to get Taylor Swift and Bruce Springsteen and the Foo Fighters to talk about voting from abroad. They're all going to be touring next year abroad, and they would be amazing advocates for us.
Cool.
But so if anyone has a tie-in with them, let us know.
Yeah.
We have a quick question from Randy and then we'll have Robert thank us all and wrap it up.
Just I'm wondering, Julia, we did talk about phone banking this morning in a meeting, and it's tough because if you overdo it and you call too many people, so if you're doing country calling campaigns or global campaigns and then state campaigns, and the same people are getting 4 or 5 calls, they start to get really irritated. So that's a good thing. But I'm just wondering, in the past, there have been these postcard campaigns, which are sometimes a little costly and tough to manage in terms of logistics. But I wonder if by state team, that's just another touch point with that state's voters. So you've got calling, you've got texting, you've got emailing, and then you have maybe the younger clientele don't find that particularly interesting to get a piece of paper in the mail. But the middle range and older voter kind of likes that touchy-feely thing. And if somebody could come up with a cute graphic or a cute message, it might resonate with North Carolina voters.
Yep, that's true. And we've used postcards a lot in the past, so they can be very popular. They're better sent from the country committees because it's too expensive to do it globally.
Yeah.
Okay. This has been amazing as always. There's always a million great comments and questions. Robert, why don't you wrap us up with a thank you and an encouragement to participate with us?
Will do. I assume you can hear me there. Thanks for calling on me, Tim. Our North Carolina group has only existed since the 3rd of January, 2022. And originally, there were only 2 of us. Sylvia and I were the first 2. We were a bit by ourselves. We were able to get 3 webinars done that first year of existence. Then Tim and Chloe joined us and really brought some expertise that we needed. But we need lots more. So we're very, very grateful to have Jeff and Jennifer with us this evening to bring in the expertise on the fundraising side. And we'd really be delighted if some of you who've been watching could also come along and join our North Carolina team. You can find it on the Democrats Abroad website, on Facebook, for example. We need more hands. We need more. There's a lot to do. That's very clear from what's been presented this evening. But we need more people to be able to do it. So please do come along and join us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all, everyone. We're going to sign off now. Jessica, Jeff had to go to another call. Jessica, your slides were incredible, and Jennifer and Chloe coming in at the last minute to also show some of the really deep data, which I think is so critical. We can just do so much for North Carolina, no matter where we live around the world. From Jessica in Ashe County to Julia in the gorgeous Czech Republic, we can all do stuff that's so important to for our state. So I can't thank you all enough, and we'll send follow up to make sure you know how to sign up for our North Carolina teams from anywhere. Okay.